My lords, today we will be discussing the various forms of organic space fauna that occupy our galaxy. Space fauna ranges from the non-sapient space-dwelling creatures to gargantuan Leviathans. They can be incredibly dangerous, but they also offer fantastic research opportunity. And these days, they can even be used for military purposes. We'll start with the most common creature, the space amoeba. Space amoebas are non-sapient spacefaring creatures that can be encountered while exploring the galaxy. They are large, floating organisms with tentacle-like appendages and are often found in clusters of multiple individuals or in their home system, which we believe to be some sort of giant breeding nest, a more avello. It is worth noting that when exploring space amoebas' breeding grounds, or even simply observing them, the infant amoebas will bond to the first thing they see. This has, sadly in the past, resulted in baby amoeba bonding and following our science vessels, which can be somewhat awkward to manage. Bubbles is the prime example of that, but I'll cover her shortly. It can also result in the extremely sad instances where baby amoebas bond to asteroids or other stellar bodies, and then follow them until they starve. In the round, space amoebas are typically neutral or passive towards other species, but they will become aggressive if provoked or if their territory is encroached upon. They also have a specific subspecies called space amoeba hunters. This particular group is very aggressive. Space amoebas are generally considered to not be very intelligent, but nevertheless they can pose a significant threat to smaller ships due to their size and strength. Incidentally, we've also discovered that temporarily refraining from venting certain emissions from our vessel's reactor cores while in the vicinity of space amoebas does tend to make them more passive, and this protocol can help to pacify them, if that is indeed the goal. Space amoeba have a tough armoured hide that has regenerative properties, and we have used samples of their armour to formulate a self-repairing hull technology that is now incorporated on the majority of our fleet. If space amoeba are attacked, they will respond by spitting a type of plasma which is capable of burning through thick armour, and the larger ones have some sort of symbiotic relationship with a small creature that we've named Amoeba flagella. They act in a similar way to conventional strikecraft and can be very effective when used en masse. The amoebas have two distinct growth stages, amoeba and mother. They take approximately 30 months to mature into mothers that can breed, and then only take 6 months to birth new amoeba into the galaxy. Space amoebas are also known to be tameable. The legendary amoeba lovingly referred to as Bubbles is a prime example. Long ago she followed a science vessel home and was subsequently adopted by the lead scientist. Bubbles now patrols our inner colonies well away from harm, allowing her to raise her little baby amoeba in relative safety. Next up is the Crystalline Entities. The Crystalline Entities are another type of non-sapient spacefaring creature that can be encountered within our galaxy. They are large, crystalline organisms that float through space and are often found near asteroid belts or other sources of minerals. Like space amoebas, crystalline entities are typically neutral or passive towards other species, but they will become aggressive if provoked, or if their territory is encroached upon. They have powerful energy weapons that can deal significant damage to ships, particularly poorly shielded ships, and their crystalline structures can make them very resistant to damage. Crystalline entities are made out of a unique crystal lattice structure. The compound has a remarkable tensile strength, and we have begun to experiment supplementing our standard starship hulls with this crystal structure, in the hope that it will offer drastic improvement on hull integrity. It is unknown how the crystal entities reproduce, but younger, i.e. smaller crystals, appear to congregate around a large crystalline object that we have designated the Nidus. The Nidus occupies a pulsar system, and ships need to be wary of its shield nullification effects, more so given that the crystal energy weapons have fantastic armour shredding abilities. Crystalline entities begin as shardlings. They take approximately 40 months to grow large enough to be classified as a shard, and another 40, so 80 in total, months to reach their largest growth stage, a quintessence. Even at their largest growth stage, they never become a particularly military capable object. Their hull points only reaches 1400, approximately half that of a battleship. But circling back to the Nidus, it does appear to be the central hub of all crystalline activity, and the Crystalline Entities will defend this system to the very last entity. Despite being hostile, they can however be tamed or pacified, and will then allow an empire or nation to travel through the system unassaulted. We have been fortunate enough to sample a piece of the Nidus itself, and found it to be of a far denser structure than any of its lesser offspring. Should you get the opportunity to sample it, I'd highly recommend it. Now I move on to the self-replicating mining drones that are frankly a plague upon the galaxy. They are obviously non-organic, but nevertheless I felt it fitting to include them here. The mining drones appear to be remnants of a long-lost civilization and are often found in abandoned mining facilities or asteroid belts. We have found these creatures to be particularly aggressive when approached, and if left to their own devices, they will mine asteroids and self-replicate to create more and more drones who will then propagate to nearby systems. They are quite the space pest. The drones, however, do have reasonably powerful mining lasers that they use to extract minerals and other resources from asteroids. This technology has been salvaged from defeated drones and is rather effective against hardened armor technologies. We have discovered through the use of our vast sentry array that the mining drones may actually belong to the caretaker Machine Fallen Empire. It is not entirely clear if they're under its control, but we believe they are certainly allied to it. We suspect at one point the caretakers, when operating at peak effectiveness, created these Autobots to go forth and harvest the galaxy for valuable minerals and alloys on their behalf. But since central processing became destroyed, the drones simply mine and store the minerals in order to create more and more of themselves. I wonder if one day we'll be able to fix them or simply take control of them entirely. One fleet admiral, after defeating a rather large group of drones, managed to salvage a remarkable piece of technology called the Surveyor. The Surveyor has proven most valuable in determining where to set up mining and research facilities. In fact, given its cost to use ratio, the Surveyor is probably the single best ancient relic in the entire galaxy. Cutholoids. If ancient mining drones are pests, I'm not quite sure how to categorize Cutholoids. They are indeed a plague upon the galaxy. Cutholoids are perhaps the most frustrating of all of the space fauna to deal with. Empires will often lose a scientist to them with little to no prior warning. They are ambush predators that hide in asteroid belts. The more asteroids a system has, the more likely a Cutholoid will be in one. A little like hermit crabs, Cutholoids will find an asteroid of appropriate size and then use it as a defensive shell. Depending on the size of the asteroid, this can provide the creature with significant armor. They come in three forms: hatchling, juveniles, and fully adult-grown Cutholoids. It takes approximately 80 months from a hatchling to reach full maturity. They are, however, unique in that once tamed, they can devour ships smaller than them, which when used for military purposes can be quite the tactic. If you're fighting them, I'd highly recommend to use disruptors, or weapons that penetrate armor, as they are relatively squishy compared to their thick, armored shells. Void Clouds. Next we have the entity designated as Void Clouds. These are large, amorphous, cloud-like organisms that float through the void of space, consuming energy and minerals from the stars and other celestial bodies. We have discovered that void clouds were formed not long after our galaxy, making them the oldest living entity we have ever identified. We suspect that they are several billion years older than even Earth herself. Void clouds are always hostile towards other species and will attack any ships that come too close. They have powerful energy weapons and can deal significant damage to ships, and their amorphous structure makes them difficult to target with conventional weaponry. Void clouds are interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, they appear to propagate exclusively from the black hole system known as the Great Wound, the same black hole system in which we speculated an unbidden invasion occurred. Of all the systems in the galaxy, That is one I'd like to know more about. Secondly, void clouds are unique in Space Fauna in that they have a natural shielding, likely it is psionic in nature, because they also have remarkably powerful energy weapons. Their weapons appear almost entirely random in terms of damage output, similar to a focused arc emitter. It's unclear how they operate, but we have examples of corvettes striking off direct hits with ease and then being completely blown apart by a glancing hit. It is likely that their energy weapons, designated Cloud Lightning, are psionic in nature, thus affecting its assumed randomness. Finally, regarding the void clouds, there appears to be a larger entity designated Vlur, which appears to be at least somewhat intelligent. Vlur is of a similar nature to the void clouds, but significantly larger in mass, and creates a large subspace disturbance as it travels between systems. A colossal space storm follows in its wake. The entity does not acknowledge hails or any attempts at communication, but our scientists believe that the tachyon particles that it emits are a form of language. If they've translated the pulses correctly, the entity is saying, Vlur seeks, Vlur finds. What this being is seeking or finding is unclear, but it is not immediately hostile. In fact, it completely ignores our science vessels. I would speculate that it may be a scout of some sort, possibly left behind by a psionic or extra-dimensional invader, given its weaponry and shielding. Equally, it may have just seeped into our universe via the transient mess that remains of the Great Wound system, and there is in fact an entire race of void cloud-like entities, a mere mishap away from appearing in our galaxy. Were that to happen, it could be quite the crisis. Voidworms. Voidworms are parasitic creatures and require a planet-based organic host in order to reproduce. Indeed, the voidworm plague can be a fully fledged crisis upon the galaxy. The voidworms are a dangerous entity, potentially the most dangerous of all of the entities on this list. Indeed, the voidworm plague was a significant event in our history, which caused great destruction across the galaxy. Voidworms have 4 growth stages. They start as nymphs, which appear reasonably small, similar to a corvette in size, but they soon grow into juveniles, which are closer to destroyers, and eventually, 180 months later, they'll mature into adults. Eventually, the adults will form something called a troika. This is a never-ending, perpetual mating ritual where 3 adult voidworms link creature to creature to create one large, symbiotically linked creature. Despite this perpetual mating, they do still require an external biological host in which to grow their offspring. Upon reaching adulthood, each voidworm will develop a clutch of cysts within their reproductive system. These cysts contain highly caustic gametes. Adult voidworms, in troikas, will combine their gametes and send them via spores onto planets with suitable biomass in the hope that the spores will infect the planet-side fauna, and eventually this infection would kill the host, and birth a baby voidworm, i.e. a nymph. These nymphs, once birthed, will enter into space and make their way back to the voidworm nesting ground, which is situated in a black hole system. It is here in the safety of their nesting systems that they will mature into juvenile voidworms. Juveniles are far more active. They will leave the safety of the nest and go scouting for suitable target worlds ripe for infection. Once they've identified these potential targets, they'll return to the nest and direct the adult troikas to their locations. The troikas move in to bombard planets with spores, and thus the cycle of life continues. It is most interesting that we have clear evidence the voidworms coordinate in their bombardments so as to maintain a sustainable number of viable hosts throughout the galaxy. They are clearly intelligent enough to not wantonly consume. It would almost appear that we are like cattle to them. Of all the space fauna, voidworms are the most powerful from a military perspective. Troikas have approximately 12,000 hull points, which is the equivalent of roughly 4 battleships, and can output similar amounts of damage if called upon. I would stress, beware of the primal calling or beastmaster empires that will focus on growing these for military use. They will be dangerous opponents indeed. The Tiyanki. The last spacefaring creatures before we get onto the mighty Leviathans are the Tiyanki, space whales. These beautiful creatures are enormous whale-like organisms that roam the void of space, feeding on gases and minerals found in asteroid belts and other celestial bodies. Unlike many of the spacefaring entities we've discussed, the Tiyanki are exclusively passive and will not attack other species or ships unless first fired upon. Sadly, the Tiyanki are often hunted by aggressive empires seeking to harvest their corpses for energy and exotic gas. Some civilizations consider Tiyanki to be sacred or holy creatures and may seek to protect them from harm, and as we've seen in the Galcom, the subject of Tiyanki protection is a hotly debated topic. Furthermore, if an empire hunts too many Tiyanki, the enigmatic observers, the xenophilic Fallen Empire, will have a rather negative opinion of them, and is highly likely to attack them as a punishment for this perceived crime. The Tiyanki have 4 growth stages: hatchlings, which take approximately 14 months to age into calves. In another 14 months, calves will reach their adult stage, bulls and cows respectively, and 80 months of life, roughly 6.5 years, Tiyanki will reach their final growth stage, known as an ox. At this point they do become rather powerful creatures, having approximately 5,000 hull points, which would be more than a standard battleship. They also have a rather long reproductive cycle. They gestate for approximately 12 months. The Tiyanki propagate from 2 systems, Tiana Vec, a wonderful system containing 4 large gas giants, and we assume that this system is the equivalent of a bountiful feast, and the Tiyan Ort system. Dr. Grant explored the Tiyan Ort system in great detail, and his report is detailed in our records under Tiyanki Corpse World. I'll deviate slightly from the topic, but I wonder, what would happen should the Tiyanki come into contact with the Dathnak? Would they eat them? That would be a rather cruel but somewhat amusing end for the annoying gas bags. The Tiyanki are also the only spacefaring entity that I've discussed to be able to include a Leviathan class creature in their ranks, and this brings me nicely onto the Leviathans of our galaxy, and we'll start with the Tiyanki Matriarch. The Matriarch is the largest and by far the strongest Tiyanki space whale we have ever encountered. Currently, she patrols the Altair system, which contains an uninhabited Gaia world. It's unclear why she settled in this system or why she's protecting this world, but she has fantastic offensive capabilities, and of all of the entities we've discussed, can easily pump out the most damage. Rumour is rife regarding the Matriarch. It appears that several bold spaceship captains have attempted to fell the mighty beast, and if the tales are to be believed, a daring admiral named Reth Undul attempted to face the monster solo. Unfortunately, his vessel, AH-4B, or Ahab, was swallowed by the beast whole. The Spectral Wraith. We've encountered a number of different wraiths in our time exploring the galaxy. They appear to come in 3 different forms, depending on the star system they're birthed in. We speculate that the eggs laid by the adult wraiths must have a way of siphoning energy from a system star. The star type ends up dictating the species of wraith that hatches, and the wraith is unique for 2 reasons. Firstly, unlike the other Leviathans on the list, the wraith is quite happy to roam between star systems, seemingly not at all content to stay anchored to its birthed system. Secondly, the species of wraith has a relationship with the system star. In systems where the wraith's colour matches the system star, they will become significantly less dangerous, and we postulate that when in these systems, they can feed upon the star's energy. It is in this feeding state it becomes weak and lethargic. The Stellar Devourer. The Stellar Devourer is one of the galaxy's true wonders, a truly magnificent but terrifying creature. This beast is composed entirely of energy and literally feeds on stars, consuming them utterly. The Devourer has 6 great appendages that appear impermeable to heat and radiation as it forces them deep into a star's photosphere, latching on before its great maw begins to suck and consume the star's energy. We found the Devourer in the Zeta Turnikai system, feeding on a yellow dwarf star. The system's planets had long since frozen over. The Devourer seemed content to be left feeding, and the science vessel investigating smartly kept its distance. Disturbing this creature from feeding would likely not go well for us. The corrupted avatar. Through exploration of a wormhole, we found a being composed entirely of psionic energy. This being occupied a star system with a single uninhabited Gaia world. The system had no exiting hyperlanes, and the only exit was the wormhole. I can describe it only as a large, dense ball of psionic energy surrounded by swirling psionic disturbances. Our scientists theorized that it was summoned from the shroud by whoever used to occupy the planet. The being then subsequently butchered the entire race who lived on that world, or perhaps they self-sacrificed, but nevertheless, it left the system in the state we found it. This monster was felled by Strikeforce Gamma's kinetic batteries, a beast from the shroud indeed, but it still fell beneath the might of our weapons. The Voidspawn. The Voidspawn is a marvellous creature, and is perhaps closely related to the race of aliens who infested several hundred worlds with great devouring worm-like creatures, in the hope to use them as an activated superweapon. The Voidspawn could certainly be a continuation of that research, but it could of course just be a naturally occurring creature who happens to lay its eggs in planets. We initially encountered seismic disturbances on Glycis 581G. Colonization of the planet had just begun when seismologists discovered unusual activity beneath the planet's crust. As it turned out, a larval Voidspawn had hatched and was slowly consuming parts of the planet and gradually growing in size. We were lucky our excellent scientists caught the incident early, and the decision to allow the monster to grow was made, but the colony of course evacuated, while a large military fleet was brought in, just in case the creature was hostile. The creature eventually grew so large it cracked the planet in two. Unfurling great appendages, it slithered out of the broken world, and perhaps unsurprisingly, became immediately hostile. Fortunately, the men and women of the Commonwealth are used to difficult combat situations, and although studying the creature while alive would have been preferable, it was quickly put down through concentrated tachyon lance bursts. Most noteworthy was the creature's offensive capabilities. It fired living missiles that tracked the heat or radiation of our vessels. These missiles were remarkable, penetrating shields and boring great holes into neutronium armor. Indeed, a cruiser was split in two when it drifted too close to the beast. Our biologists are working on replicating the technology, and perhaps we can use these creatures ourselves. Most worryingly, however, is that our biologists believe that the Voidspawn that we fought, despite its size, was only an infant. Looking into its genetic code, they tell me that Voidspawn could grow as large as individual star systems. Indeed, it is quite possible they could even consume entire star systems. We have never, ever seen a creature with this much capability before. The Sky Dragon. The Sky Dragon, also known as Hogazar of the Endless Flames, is a dragon from beyond our galaxy. It travelled here as a mere whelp to seek out a nascent civilization to assist in raising their young. Upon finding a pre-FTL species, it guided them, waiting until they eventually reached the point where the dragon deemed them worthy for communication, and eventually form an alliance. After enough time, the dragon will even go on to birth children of its own, which will fly and fight alongside it. The Ether Drake. We found the Ether Drake drifting above a molten world in the Epsilon Indi system. It was obviously guarding something on the planet and became immediately hostile to the exploring science vessel. Subsequently, the patrolling Strike Force Zeta was called in to assist in clearing out the beast, and like so many before it, the Drake would fall to the might of our battle fleets. This resulted in two significant outcomes. Firstly, the Strike Force commander earned something of a name for himself. Admiral Davos is now being referred to as Davos the Dragon Slayer by the general populace, and it was he who championed bringing the dragon's corpse back to Unity for a parade, and it was certainly a great boon to the planet. The other noteworthy event occurred when the science teams were able to get in and survey the system. On the molten world the Drake had been guarding, they found a corpse of another great Drake, perhaps the beast's mate, and more significantly, they found an egg. Currently unhatched, it has been transported to an appropriate facility in the hope it hatches, and maybe one day we will have our very own space dragon. Shard. Shard is a famous dragon, famous enough to at least have a name, despite the fact she is essentially another ether drake. Shard got her own name due to the fact we found her among a ruined decayed city, thought to be of Ketling origin. Shard was protecting a relic known as the Rubricator, a marvellous device able to produce from seemingly nothing mysterious ancient artifacts. We encountered and defeated her on this planet, but due to her nature, she gets her own entry here. The Dimensional Horror. Upon exploration of the black hole in the Cygnus 1 system, science vessel Archimedes was immediately attacked by a being of unknown origin. Incorporeal claws appeared outside the ship, scraping at its shields in an attempt to crush the vessel. Before the crew knew what was happening, they were hit by a colossal beam of purple energy, which utterly obliterated the vessel. All hands were sadly lost. Since the incident, we have only sent in automated probes, and what we have found was distressing indeed. A colossal, six-limbed monstrosity appears to be stuck in a dimensional portal of sorts. It wiggles and writhes, attempting to escape its prism. We have no idea how long it's been trapped here, but it is clearly incredibly capable and possibly psionic in nature, given the claws that it can conjure. We are assembling a mighty fleet to deal with this abomination and can only hope its total destruction closes the portal behind it. Should we simply unplug the portal, a real galactic crisis could occur. The Toxic God is next. And the Toxic God, or at least the organic creature that we find masquerading as such, is one of, if not the most powerful single entity in the galaxy. Fleets of battleships and cruisers are required to defeat this monster. It is shrouded in mystery and the object of the Knights of the Toxic God's quest. It will unleash hordes of strikecraft upon any who enter its system and will blow larger ships apart with its colossal beam weapon. We know that it is not the real Toxic God, for he lives in the shroud. So really, what is this thing? Sadly, we may never find out. And finally, the enigmatic cache, known as Baldor. The enigmatic cache, or Baldor, isn't technically space fauna, but it is worth mentioning nevertheless. It is a cylinder-shaped entity that emerged from a gateway one day. It then set course for the nearest empire that was not at war, and began to scan all of their planets. Eventually, once this creature had finished scanning, it contacted the empire, offering to uplift them. We witnessed this several times, and it would appear a few different outcomes can occur. It would seem that Baldor is not really in the best mechanical state, and, seemingly entirely by chance, the species that Baldor tries to uplift can indeed sometimes become uplifted, providing them with improved intelligence. However, they can also be turned into vegetables, which isn't really ideal. I would advise empires not to gamble on this one.